Welcome, and thank you for joining us for selecting the right cold storage for your life science application. Critical questions to ask when evaluating low and ultra low temperature solutions. Before we begin today's webinar, let's cover some housekeeping items. This presentation is best viewed using the GoToWebinar software for PC or Mac, or by using the GoToWebinar app on your smartphone or tablet. For the duration of the webinar, all attendees will be placed on listen-only mode. If you have a technical difficulty, please send a message in the chat and our moderator will assist you. Throughout the presentation, if you have questions for our speakers, please enter them in the chat window. We will address all questions at the conclusion of our discussion during the live Q&A. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Rebecca McCoy, and I will be moderating today's webinar. I'm the Digital Marketing Manager for FARRAR, a brand of Trane Technologies life science solutions. Without further ado, let's get started. In today's webinar, you will gain a deeper understanding of available cold storage technologies, learn the critical questions to ask when selecting a cold storage solution, and be able to evaluate low and ultra low temperature storage solution options more effectively. Let's introduce today's speakers. So for today, we have Rajib Ahmed, FARRAR Regional Business Manager for BioPharma and Research Equipment, as well as Christian Podersky, FARRAR Regional Business Manager for Engineered Solutions. Thanks, Rajib and Christian, for joining us today. Let's kick off the discussion. As we know, the pharma, biopharma, and biotech, really all life sciences industries, continue to rapidly evolve. Not surprisingly, advancements in cold storage technology have also evolved to keep pace with industry needs. The variety of low and ultra low temperature storage options has expanded, sometimes making choosing the just right cold storage overwhelming. We'll start with Rajib. Rajib, you focus on reaching cold storage, including ultra low temperature and freeze thaw solutions. What are some of the common challenges your customers are facing when it comes to evaluating their next solution?
Thank you very much, Rebecca. It is an honor and privilege to be on this webinar with our audience here. So let's get started. It is very important to recognize that each customer or each organization will have a unique set of challenges based on their applications and or goals. In other words, one size doesn't fit all. So the high level ones, Rebecca, that I constantly come across are, number one, stakeholders input, which is pretty obvious, right? And number two, the number of stakeholders they're dealing with when they're selecting the right cold storage solution that would work within their budget constraint. So these two challenges make it critical to ensure that the right cold storage solution is selected, subsequently optimized, and it works within their budget so that everybody's happy and the right direct product is properly stored. Back to you, Rebecca.
Thanks so much, Rajib. We'll pivot to Christian. From an engineered cold room perspective, what are the main challenges you're hearing from your customers?
Thank you very much, Rebecca, and hello to everybody that has joined us today. Lots of the times we can see some constraints or questions lots of times in regards to the footprint of the chambers that they're receiving or what's being designed up for them. Basically, you know, the length, the width, the height of them. And so when you have a brand new building, a lot of that questions are not necessarily asked as much because things are very open. People have the opportunity to make changes and they can do many opportunities with that new building. However, there's more constraints than in an existing building, which make it much more challenging. So for example, like where's your chamber going to go and how's it going to get there? You know, walk-ins are built on site, so it's not something that just shows up on the loading dock and gets put in place and then brought online. So many times for the walk-in solution, they're there for an extended period of time since you're building, piping, doing electrical work as such. So with that being said though, if you're on slab on grade, for example, on basically your first floor, you're going to come in through a loading dock and then you're going to bring all your materials into that location. If you're going up onto a second, third, or fourth floor, especially of say an existing building that has to be retrofitted, you're going to most likely come through that same loading dock, but then you're going to have to go up an equipment elevator. So when you're going up that equipment elevator, you have to make sure will your equipment actually fit into that elevator? So generally your largest piece of material is your wall panel. It might be 4 inches thick, 46.5 inches wide, but it could be 8'5" tall, or we'll say 8'6", 9'6", 10'6", etc. going up. So you have to make sure you can get one wall panel in at a time or a ceiling panel in at a time. And then you have to make sure that you can get it down the corridor of these other floors and then make turns that are 90 degrees. So if you have long panels, you have to be very, very aware of where that chamber is going to be placed and put into it. So you go down the hallway, you make the corners, and then you have to go through a door. Most doors are 36 inches. So you got to make sure your equipment can get through these doors. What are the alternatives to that if that can't happen? Most likely you're going to be using something to crane it in. Now, if it's a brand new construction, no problem. There's a lot of cranes on sites and people can bring in the materials to other levels of floors, no problem. But if it's an existing space, now are you removing windows from an existing building? Are you removing brick, mortar, things of this nature to get that material? And it can become much more challenging. And that's why on other floors, though, the chambers are the size of they are. It's due to constraints of how to get into the inner side of it, especially when you're working with something that is existing. Also, too, though, when you're working with chambers that will be on, say, the first floor, slab on grade, you have to look at based upon their temperatures. Are you going to have to insulate that floor? Will you have to heat that floor? Will you have to do both? We just need kerf cuts. A kerf cut is usually used in a 2 to 8 degree C type chamber, where it's simple as a 1/4 inch wide by 2.5 inch deep saw cut going around it. All these methods create vapor barriers, and the vapor barriers are so important so that way you will not have any form of sweating or ice buildup. If you're not going to have a floor that's going to be based upon the curve cut or heated, things of this nature, especially if you're up on a second or third floor where they're not going to dig up an existing building's concrete floor because they would never want something to collapse. We're going to have to provide, or you will need, insulated floor panels. So once you have those insulated floor panels put in place, though, you have to take into effect how many pounds can you have on that insulated floor, so that that insulation barrier that's been created does not start to dimple, reflex, go down. And also, though, will you need internal ramps or external ramps? One consideration also to take in during new construction and a retrofit of an existing building is what's above. How high can you look? Are there water mains already put in place? Are they already existing? Is there existing ductwork? Are there sprinkler lines? Are there drain lines all in place? Because we're going to have to put our own equipment. In some cases, we have to put our condensing units up in those locations as well. So we don't want any interference with any of those mains, any types of beams, any existing conduits, because we have to run our own piping and conduits as well, and we'll need serviceable areas for the people that want to be involved with this equipment, whether it's remote or on top of the box. Thank you, Ms. Rebecca.
Great, thank you, Christian. Now that we understand some of the challenges in selecting a cold storage solution, we want to hear from the audience with our first poll. What is the most valuable to you in low and ultra low temperature storage? Energy efficiency and sustainability, performance, simplified maintenance, temperature uniformity, or redundancy? So we'll give everyone some time to answer this poll question. Leave the poll open for about another 10-15 seconds. So if you haven't already, go ahead and pop your response in the window for us. All right, so we'll go ahead and let's share back those poll results. So our audience today primarily is concerned with performance and temperature uniformity. So did any of these results surprise you guys?
No, ma'am, not at
Not
all.
at all. Not at all.
Great. All right, let's move on to the next part of our presentation. So one of the first questions that should be asked when evaluating and selecting a low or ultra low temperature solution is what exactly is being stored. We'll start this question with Christian. Christian, what are some of the key points that should be considered when it comes to understanding the product requirements for a cold storage solution?
Thank you very much, Rebecca. This is a very, very important topic that we definitely need to discuss. So whether the chamber could be ICH, GMP, CGMP, invalidated, you want to pinpoint exactly what's going on, and you need to have the precise details to be able to calculate load calculations and have the chamber do what it needs to do. So for example, we're going to find out what your temperature and your volumetric uniformity will be, and also if you have a humidity variance that's needed. So that would be a relative humidity variance that might be seen in a cold room or freezers, typical aspects of it. So you can have a -80, you could have maybe a freezer that's going to at -40 or -20, a cold room 2 to 8 with a set point of 4 or 5. You might have a cold room that's 2 to 8 and have a requirement for humidity variance to be below 65%. So basically you want to not have mold possibly or any chance of mold growth there. You're stripping out that moisture. You can do warm rooms, you can do stability chambers, that would be 25, 60% RH, maybe 30 degrees C, 65% RH, or 40 degrees C, 75% RH. Those are the typical stability aspects of what those chambers would be. And what we want to do is look at that for not only their size, their length, width, and height. We want to calculate what their square footage can be and what their cubic volume could be also as well. So after we get past that point, we are going to ask you, what is the ambient surrounding the chamber location? So where you're putting this in, what temperature ranges does your building control at? All right, we're going to ask you if you have what your occupation load is, or occupying load, whichever you prefer to call it. Basically, that is how many people are going to go into the chamber and for how long, so we can determine if we have to provide makeup air per OSHA regulations and safety for people. And then we want to know how often you're going in. And so those are some key aspects of what's going on with the people that will be going in and out of the chambers. And then we're going to also ask you questions like, is your product coming in on pallets? Are they coming in carts? Are they going to be in bottles or bags? What is that method there? Is that material going to be water-like or something similar? Is the packaging for it going to be in stainless steel, plastic, or glass? And how much of it will be in there per day? Are you bringing it in and out? What its weight and what its temperature. The temperature is excellent to know. If you have a -20, we have to calculate if your product is coming in at, say, 2 to 8, or possibly even warmer, say, 20 degrees C or something of this nature, because we have to be able to calculate how much heat of rejection is occurring, that we need to bring it down to that temperature. So what are your door openings to the ambience? And how long will those door openings be there? And what size is that door actually going to be? Is it a standard like 3x8? Is it a sliding door? Is it a high-speed roll-up? And then we're also going to look at the final aspects of what type of equipment could you have inside of your chamber that generate heats. For example, if you have many convenience receptacles inside of there, are you plugging shakers into it or other aspects of it? Or are you going to come in with a fork truck going in and out generating it? Because we want to know all those items, because what it can do is help us properly size, and so down the road we're going to also be able to mitigate and manage all of your defrost needs inside of a chamber.
Great, thank you, Christian. We'll throw the next question to Rajiv. So Rajiv, what should we be considering when it comes to temperature and chamber uniformity within a cold storage solution?
Thank you again, Rebecca. Excellent question. So when it comes to temperature or chamber uniformity, and we're going to use these two terms interchangeably because they refer to the same concept. What's really important to determine is whether your materials or samples are being stored for long or short-term storage, because that would be directly correlated to high or low frequency of door openings, right? And as the old proverb goes, all roads lead to Rome, meaning that at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is look at the end goal of minimizing and mitigating temperature excursion, right? That is it. So I'll give you an example in terms of high frequency and low frequency of door openings, right? So let's assume that you're working at a biorepository and you are getting 200,000 vials coming back from a very successful phase 3 clinical studies, and you need to store them at -80. Barring any recall from FDA for toxicity or any other adverse side effect, chances are these samples would be stored in a -80-degree chamber for 6 to 7 years until the company would come back and say, let's discard them, right? That's an ideal situation. So you can actually think about it and say, well, for the next 6 to 7 years, these samples would be properly and safely nestled in a -80-degree C chamber, and we don't have to really open the door. So that scenario would correlate to long-term storage with low frequency of door openings, right? And you're minimizing temperature excursion. As opposed to that, let's assume that you're at a research facility or at a CRO CDMO where a very promising molecule has to be properly vetted for its biophysical characterization test to see if it's a viable candidate for the next blockbuster oncology drug. What are you going to do? You have to do a bunch of these tests. So you're going to be opening and closing the freezer door at least 15 to 20 times a day. And you can imagine how, as you're opening the door, warm air comes in, your set point temperature is changing from -80 to something higher, and temperature excursion is inevitable. In that case, you have to make sure that you take all the necessary steps to mitigate that, and make sure also that your temperature goes down to -80, so samples are properly stored, so there's no detrimental effect. Back to you, Rebecca.
Great. Thanks so much, Rajiv. We actually have another question for you. As we mentioned, the life sciences industry is continuously evolving, developing new and innovative products that often have different temperature set point requirements. Rajiv, what should be considered when it comes to the flexibility of a cold storage solution, thinking most specifically about set points and scalability?
Rebecca, you are on point today with these questions. Fantastic question again. So I'm going to answer this question with two subsequent aspects, right? First, flexibility, and then based on that, scalability, right? So if you look at a standard ULT, the working range for the temperature for a standard ULT is somewhere between -50 and -80 degrees C, right? That's basically how it works. Now, juxtapose that with the ever-evolving landscape of a pharmaceutical company where they need to pivot very quickly based on their application and sample load. So flexibility is really a key aspect for them. Now, I'm going to give you a very simple example. I'm a person who likes to use practical examples, right? So I was speaking with a client of mine. He works for a biotech company in the San Diego area. By the way, Rebecca, this is a true story, so I'm not making this up. And one thing he mentioned to me was that, Rajiv, we store our bulk drug substance products at -70 degrees C and the finished drug products at +5. So we have to have two separate refrigerator versus freezer, right, to accomplish that. Now, wouldn't that be awesome if I had one cabinet or one chamber where initially when I'm storing my bulk products or bulk substance products, I'm storing them at -70. And finally, when the finished products are done, I can just reset the set point temperature, bring it up to +5, and we're all done. I was like, yeah, that would be a great, accommodation for a given specific solution with a cold storage system. So that's where the flexibility aspect comes into play, Rebecca, to be able to pivot quickly, and depending on your client's application and goals, you'd be able to cover a wide range of temperatures. Now, let's go one step further. Let's assume that now you've selected a molecule. It's a great product. You have to scale it up because that's going to be the next drug out there on the market. So think about this production floor now, right? You have a fleet of 20 freezers. Now, initially, what you're going to do is store your bulk substance products at -70 until you've gone through the entire bio process and finally made your drug product, which would be stored at +5. Now, the conventional system or existing solution, Rebecca, what people can do right now is with those 20 freezers, you have to have 2 or 3 different set points. But imagine that initially you could just store all of your samples at -70. And then once the products are ready, you can actually go back and reset that to +5. That way, you're eliminating the need to have multiple freezers from your fleet at different set point temperatures. That's the power of scalability. So once you have the flexibility coupled with scalability, that would give our customers the necessary convenience to make sure that one fleet of freezers would accomplish all the goals for them. And this is where they would come to us and talk to us, and we'll be able to offer a custom tailored solution. So flexibility and scalability are the key features that any customer in the life science industry would be striving toward. Rebecca, back to you.
Great. Those are some awesome insights, Rajiv. Christian, this next question's for you. We know that cold storage is critical to the success of the pharma, biopharma, and biotech industries. Since cold storage is so important, what should we be thinking about when it comes to mitigating failures?
You know, that's a great question that you've asked. When it comes into mitigating failures, before we get, we start with day 1, go day 2, day 3. Before we start to go down that line, lots of people do not think about putting 100% mechanical redundancy into a system. If you do it from the very get-go with that mindset, it will help out greatly. So what is 100% mechanical redundancy? They are 2 independent, identical systems that each system can handle 100% of the load. So each system can do it on its own. So we'll call, let's say, the first system side A, and we'll call the second system side B. So let's say you have side A up and running, say every 12 hours or 24 hours, you'll do a switch over to side B. And so then side B will run 12 hours or 24. Many people prefer to do it at the 24-hour time interval because that's usually a first shift at a plant, and there's more people, there's more activities, there's a lot of coverage located in that areas during those times. So what's really neat about this though is doing those switchovers, you have equal runtime on your units, your condensing units and evaporators, your equipment. So it's not like side A runs 100% of the time and then during a failure, then side B comes on X years later. They're equally running together, opposite each other. So also what's really neat about that is you can defrost your systems. If side A is shutting down for side B to run, you can defrost your side A system. So you won't see as great as a temperature spike if you only had one system in there. And then what's really neat too, say you're having a day that you have to go out of your design specs. And what I mean by that is say you're going to load a lot of product into a chamber, and you're going to have extended door openings and extended, say, fork trucks or equipment going in there. You will have the ability to run both systems at the exact same time, and this is called concurrent redundancy. So now you've increased your abilities by 100% to keep your chambers from having excursions during these obviously opened door openings and heat excursions, which will bring in warmer temperature air into the chamber. So this will help pull it down greatly and keep it in the spec. So it's a very big advantage. If you do not have mechanical redundancy, someday you will have an alarm, and most likely it's going to be a high temperature alarm. When that alarm occurs, the fire drill will happen because now you have to rush to save your product. And in rushing to save your product, you could lose some, might not, and your system could be down for a long time before whatever has occurred has to be replaced. So 100% mechanical redundancy is very key, in my personal opinion, to help mitigate product loss or failures, because you do not have to find a new location for any of your material. If you lose a side A, side B will come on, and it will run until you physically turn side A back on. So you're safe, you can sleep at night. It's a very good practice to consider.
All right, thank you, Christian. So before we discuss our next consideration, we actually want to hear from the audience again. So we'll launch our second poll of today's presentation. Does your organization or your customer's organization require good manufacturing practices or GMP validated solutions? Yes, no, or unsure. We'll give everyone another 20 seconds. Go ahead and get their answers in. All right, go ahead. And it looks like 80% of today's audience does have GMP validation requirements, which is a great segue into our next critical question. So Christian, this is another one for you. When evaluating a low or ultra low temperature cold storage solution, what considerations should be made for support and service?
That's a great question. Thank you very much, Ms. Rebecca. So in my mind, for what we're looking at here is we want companies that can validate your equipment and also provide preventative maintenance to them, because that way you're ensuring whoever has given you your day one, built your chamber for you, and it's providing the equipment for you, also knows how to make sure it's validated and do PMs and calibration with you, and it turns it into a partner for life. Your success is our success. It's simple, as clear as that. So when you're looking at the validation aspect, you have IQs, OQ, PQs. So your IQ is an installation qualification. So we're going to show you that our chamber is doing what we said it was going to do. It's relatively defined. Your temperature and uniformity is wide open, showing you what's going to occur with it, and it's mapped out. Then you get into your OQ, which is an operation qualification, and we're going to verify that your equipment is designed properly, and we're going to prove that to you as well. Then when you go into the PQ, which is your performance qualification, if you have simulated product in there, things of that nature, we are going to show you that we are creating and you're having the results that you need. So this ensures and safeguards everything that you're putting into your chambers. So you're guaranteed that your investment is working right, and you are safely understanding and knowing and sleeping at night that your product is stored properly in there. And then another big thing in my mind is though preventive maintenance. All chambers are going to come with a 1-year warranty, factory warranty on them. So with that being said though, I've seen many times people kind of say, hey, we have a 1-year warranty, we're going to use that warranty as a preventative maintenance program. That's not a good idea, because basically that's saying that they're ignoring their equipment, hoping that or believing that there might not be anything occurring with your equipment for that whole year, which is a great assumption. But I kind of think of it as a car. I'm a car guy. I love cars, I love vehicles, I love all sorts of stuff like that. But anyways, when you buy a vehicle, a new car, you usually have maybe say a 36,000 mile warranty or 100,000 mile warranty. Does that mean you ignore during those bumper to bumper warranties doing oil changes, tire rotations, checking your fluids, looking at your pressures? No, you don't, because that's a good way to get yourself in trouble. Your oil, your engine could seize up if you go too low on oil and you're not paying attention to it. Your tires could go bald, leading into an accident. You won't pass inspections even for your states, just all sorts of stuff. If you use that mindset for when you have new equipment, no matter what it is on this caliber, considering the material that you're storing inside of it and how important that is, you do want to have a PM and calibration program that's put in place so the day that you own that equipment, when it gets turned over from the manufacturer to you, that it's covered. So basically, you want your equipment to easily run over 20 years for this type of walk-in installations, easily. So doing PMs and CALs possibly 2 times a year. Some people, every 6 months. Some people are more robust in the sense that they want to do it 4 times a year, every 3 months or every quarter. It's up to you, but it's a good way to get insight. It's a good way to see the future on your equipment. And there's many, many options for preventive maintenance. You can put remote sensors on even that you can data log your equipment and what's going on with it. So you can look at it every day to see if there's any odd occurrences and have warnings provided to you. So never rule that out, maintain it, and your equipment will run for a very, very long time. Thank you, Ms. Rebecca.
You are welcome, and thank you. So we have one final question for our speakers today, and it's actually a 3-parter. So when it comes to specifically to ultra low temperature storage, there are generally 3 types of solutions to choose from: a cold wall freezer, an ultra low walk-in chamber with a gravity coil, and then forced air convection. So we'll throw it to Rajiv for the first option. Rajiv, can you tell us a little more about cold wall convection freezers?
Absolutely, Rebecca. It would be my pleasure. So before I get started with the anatomy and the physics of cold wall freezers, right, let's just give you a brief introduction to the refrigeration cycle. And I know that it could be a bit of a regurgitation to some of our audience members, so I apologize, but I think once I explain this, you'll be able to connect the dots easily. So the basic refrigeration cycle would have 4 components. It's a compressor, condenser, expansion valve, and the evaporator. So please keep in mind that evaporator is the workhorse that's doing the job, meaning that it is actually extracting heat from your samples in the chamber, thereby cooling it and subsequently freezing it. Not to say that the other 3 components are any less, but this is the part that you'd be focusing on, right, as we're describing the cold wall freezer or natural convection freezer. So the way the system works is very simple. Low pressure vapor comes out of the evaporator, enters the compressor, and it gets compressed. So what happens when you compress gas or vapor? Chemistry 101, simple Charles and Boyle's law, right? PV is equal to nRT, so pressure and temperature would go up. So what comes out of the compressor is this high pressure and high temperature vapor that enters the condenser, which is one of the 2 heat exchangers. In this instance, you will be removing heat from the vapor. And what happens is that what the surrounding medium, it could be either air or water, doesn't matter, would actually remove that heat, thereby making the vapor liquid. So what comes out of this condenser now is still that high pressure, but low temperature liquid. And then it goes through this expansion valve. So depending on your application, Rebecca, people have different configurations. So if it's a large system, people usually use a thermostatic expansion valve. For most of the standard ULTs, it's a capillary tube. And there's a very sophisticated option called electronic expansion valve, which actually meters out the right amount of refrigerant based on your sample load in the freezer. And fortunately, Trane Technologies uses that for some of their freezers. So the purpose of the expansion valve is to drop that pressure very quickly, so some of the liquid actually boils, and then it creates this saturated mixture of liquid vapor, right? It's usually 75% liquid, 25% vapor, and then that is the heart and soul of our system, because that's the refrigerant that would actually extract heat from your samples in the chamber. So this material, would enter the evaporator, the heat transfer process would take place. You'd cool your sample first, then freeze it to -80. What comes out of this evaporator now is this low pressure vapor again, and the cycle is repeated, right? Very simple. Every single freezer refrigerator will be based on this. Now, let's take a look at how cold or natural convection freezers work, right? So here is a cross-sectional frontal skeletal view, and it's a mouthful, of a standard cold wall freezer. And we have 3 10-liter carboys filled with 8 liters of water that we're trying to freeze from +25 all the way to -80, right? So you can see on the bottom here, we have the refrigeration system. That's basically like, all 4 components except one, sorry, all 3 components except one. So this part would actually house the compressor, condenser, and the expansion valve. But the evaporator itself, if you look to your right, is the coil that's enclosed in the entire chamber that is vacuum sealed. And that's the part that would be extracting heat from your samples. So how does it work? I'm going to keep it very simple. So the basic physical principle for cold wall technology is known as heat or thermal gradient. What does it tell you? It tells you that heat will flow from a hot surface to a cold surface until it reaches equilibrium. That's how simple it is. And it's well defined by an equation known as Newton's law of cooling, which just states that the rate of heat transfer is proportional to some heat transfer coefficient, which is a constant, times the area through which heat transfer will take place, times the temperature gradient. In this case, it would be from 25 to minus 80. That's how simple it is. So now imagine the operation. You have this carboy sitting here, right? And water is filled, so it's at 25. So what's going to happen is water will start to lose heat, and it will go from plus 25 all the way to minus 80. The coldest spot in this chamber is actually the surface of the wall, because that's where the evaporator is located, right? And the evaporator is the coldest spot. So that's how the heat transfer process gets into action here. One thing I wanted to point out is that you can see how air is sandwiched between the surface of the carboy and the surface of the chamber. Now this air is stagnant. It's not moving, right? So there is no mechanical force aiding in the process of heat transfer. It's a natural process, hence the term natural convection. So you can imagine that the heat transfer process would be fairly slow. However, cold wall freezers are fantastic instruments designed to make sure that if you are focusing on long-term storage with low frequency of door openings, it works really well, right? Once again, I'll go back to the biorepository example. When samples are coming in, you're storing them for an indefinite period, then you're not really opening that door. So once you reach equilibrium, samples are stored and safely nestled at minus 80 degrees C. You're not opening the door. But that application, Rebecca, cold wall or natural convection, to that, another scenario where you're working at a research facility, an example that I alluded to previously, where you're opening the door on a regular basis between 10 and 15 times. You can imagine how warm air is coming in. And if you have moisture in air, it's going to be even worse. So that's when you have to have a process in place that would mitigate that temperature excursion. So for that, you're thinking about another solution, which we will be talking about shortly. And that is known as the forced air convection. So I'll save that until the next segment. So Rebecca, back to you.
That's a lot of great information, Rajiv. Thank you. So Christian, another option for ultra low temperature storage is a walk-in chamber that leverages a gravity coil. Can you tell us more about this solution?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Rebecca. Yeah, what we're looking at right here is an evaporator coil that is part of a system that's typically the cascade system for your ultra lows. So you might be minus 50 down to minus 80 degrees C. So it's a copper coil, and you're going to notice there's no fins on it and there's no blowers. It's completely gravity. So typically you might be in a hallway or in a building in production area, and you might see someone say, yes, this is where our ultra lows are located at for the walk-in solutions. Well, to get to that ultra low, you're going to go through a 5 degrees C cold room. You are then going to shut the door behind you. And then you're going to open up another door and you're going to go into a minus 20 degrees C freezer. And then once you get into that minus 20 degrees C freezer, you're going to look to your left and your right and you're going to see many other doors. Once you open up one of those doors that are on your left and or on your right, you're going to look up and now you finally see that gravity coil that's up in there. And so you're saying to yourself, why did I go through so many boxes within a box, or chamber within a chamber to get to my solution? Well, it's partly because since it's a gravity coil and it's open, you have to protect that coil from getting any type of water vapor on it, because water vapor by the way of door openings and or you and I being inside of a chamber and breathing, giving off our BTUs, will go to the coldest part of that chamber, and that coldest spot is that exact coil. So they're trying to mitigate that. So one of the ways to mitigate it, though, is you can put into it compressed dry air. So you have the owners bring us compressed dry air, and that compressed dry air is usually at a minimum minus 40 degrees C dew point. And that way, once that air comes in, it'll pressurize the chamber, and it puts a nice little positive pressure that will eventually go into the minus 20, then to the 5 degrees C vestibule cold room, and then out into your interstitial hallway. So with the gravity coil, no air movers, no fins, the cold air just drops to the bottom, the warm air goes to the top, and we're trying to do a lot of mitigation to make sure you have full capacity and runtime on the units by keeping moisture away. Because when you do a defrost on the systems, you do have to remove all the product, and you do have to warm the ultra lows up, the minus 20s up, and generally they'll turn the 5 degrees C cold room vestibule off as well, just so that you can get any form of moisture that has occurred on it cleaned up, picked up, and out of there, then bring the chambers back down into proper operation again. So it's the most common solution that's out there right now that's been seen, but there's also a few other ways that can be done, and it's really exciting. Thank you, Ms. Rebecca.
And thank you, Christian. So the final technology we call out here is forced air convection. So we'll send it back to Rajiv. You had alluded to an alternative technology to cold wall earlier. Can you tell us a little bit more about forced air convection and how we leverage it in our FARRAR reach-in solutions?
Absolutely. Thank you, Rebecca. I just want to recap quickly first, right? When we talked about the cold wall technology, that was basically geared towards if you have long-term storage with low frequency of door openings, right? As opposed to that, when you have to worry about opening the doors multiple times, you're going to have temperature increase issues in the chamber. And that's where the forced air convection, known as ultra low chamber, abbreviated as ULC from Train Technologies, powered by FARRAR, comes into play. I'll let a couple of seconds for people to let that sink in. I know I went pretty quickly on that. So one thing I would like to do is first talk about the three major design differences, right, with forced air convection or ULC technology. And that way you can juxtapose, make a comparison, and it would make sense as to why we're explaining this. One thing I would like to reiterate, and I'll mention this at the very end, is that cold wall and ULC are not competition to each other. They're complementary, okay? So the first thing I would like to point out, and this would be the first aspect, right? If you remember the design with the standard ULT, the evaporator coil wrapped around the entire chamber, right? And that's how it worked. As opposed to that, if you look at the schematic here, the evaporator is actually sitting on top as a modular unit with a ULC. In other words, the chamber is actually separate from this, right? And there's a reason behind it, and we'll talk about this, right? In this case, all four components of the refrigeration cycle are housed together, and it's a modular unit sitting on top. So what are the advantages of having this design? So when the evaporator coil is wrapped around the chamber, right, the standard ULT. Now imagine that you're opening the door multiple times. And let's assume that you're talking about a high frequency of door opening application. Now, warm air will just rush in, right, even though your chamber is initially conditioned at minus 80, and then your set point temperature will change. So what's going to happen is over time, the air will get deposited, right? It will get condensed around the entire chamber surface because that surface is the coldest spot. Now, over time, think about it. You're going to have so much ice or frost buildup, you wouldn't be able to really use that. And that's just physics. There's nothing you can do. Actually, if you can come up with a solution to that, let me know. I think you'd be the next candidate for Nobel Prize in Physics. But we just have to go with what's out there. So as opposed to that, right, if you think about the evaporator sitting on top, your chamber is somewhat separate from this. you can open the door multiple times and you still wouldn't have a lot of frost buildup on the chamber surface. You'd still have frost on the evaporator, but you don't have to worry about the chamber. That really helps with this operation of high frequency of door openings. Okay, so that's aspect number one. Aspect number two is the concept of forced air itself. So remember, if we go back, I mentioned that with the standard cold wall technology, it was stagnant air or natural convection. There's no mechanical force aiding in the process. Here, what we do is we actually use a blower motor to push air in a circular motion throughout the chamber at a very high volumetric flow rate. It's actually about 500 cubic feet per minute. So what it does is that airflow is a mechanical force that aids in the process of better heat transfer efficiency, which actually helps with sample cooling and freezing. Now, if you were to compare, the heat transfer efficiency would go up by a factor of almost 5 with a forced air convection versus standard cold wall. Now, once again, let's talk about the advantages with forced air, right? There are two things that I'd like to point out. Number one, with this circular motion of forced air inside the chamber, what it does is that it actually cools and freezes your sample that much faster. And that's highly critical because when you're looking at bioformulation or drug products, freezing your sample faster would always create smaller ice crystals. And that's critical because smaller ice crystal would actually maintain the integrity of your samples. If the ice crystals get larger, they would penetrate the cell membrane. And once you thaw the samples, a lot of them will be destroyed. So that forced air convection really helps you with that. Number two, obviously, as you're opening and closing the door, temperature excursion is something that's inevitable. But now think about it. The forced air convection would help you with this temperature recovery because it's no longer the stagnant air. It's constantly pushing air, so you're recovering and reaching your set point temperature to -80 that much faster. So that's the benefit you get with forced air convection. And finally, we have this really innovative auto defrost function that's built in the evaporator. This aspect would be tied to the first concept that I talked about, which is, minimizing this defrost issue in the chamber. So as I mentioned, right, as you're opening and closing the door, you're going to have ice build up on the evaporator. There's nothing you can do about that. So in this case, the evaporator is sitting on top. You'd still have this ice build up. So what we have done is we have instilled this auto defrost function. So on a regular basis, what you can do is turn off the evaporator for the refrigerant, and you push hot gas through the coil, which would actually melt the ice that has formed around the evaporator. You collect it in a drip panel and it comes out. And during this entire operation, you don't have to shut down your freezer. It could be fully operational. And that really saves your precious samples. Think about it. With standard ULTs, oftentimes when the ice buildup is so severe, you'd have to unplug the freezer for, I would say, at least twice a year. And during that time, you have to worry about a secondary unit to transfer samples. Needless to mention, that phenomenon, which is something everybody likes to avoid, is known as the transient warming event, TWE. And in this case, you don't have to worry about it because as you're running the auto defrost and melting that ice, you could still leave your sample inside the chamber and they're maintaining integrity. So that's the third aspect with the auto defrost. So if I were to sum things up, I would say that once again, forced air convection and cold wall technology, right? They are not actually having this headbutting contest. It's just based on your application. If you're looking at long-term storage with low frequency of door openings, there's nothing better than cold wall, and we provide that support to you. As opposed to that, you're at a research facility where high frequency of door openings is really needed for sample assessment, then the forced air convection would be a fantastic solution to you. With that, I would like to make sure that I've covered both aspects of cold wall and forced air convection. Rebecca, back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Rajiv. So we've covered a lot of information and considerations when it comes to evaluating and selecting a cold storage solution FARRAR does provide a complete line of refrigeration solutions for life sciences, including our lab grade solutions, ULC series chambers, and both custom and modular engineered cold room solutions. If you need assistance identifying the right solution for your application, our cold chain experts are happy to help. And our team leverages a consultative approach to ensure that the solution that is selected meets both your process and operational goals. So we've asked our speakers a lot of questions today, but it's time to turn the questions over to the audience for our live Q&A. If you haven't already, please put your questions in the chat box and we'll go ahead and ask those to Christian and Rajiv. So let's dive in. All right, so we might not have time for a lot of questions today, but we do have one here, and I think this might be a good one for Christian. So Christian, which system designs or equipment can be used to minimize vertical temperature variation, top to bottom, or position based on temperature variation between different locations in a large freezer?
That's an excellent question. So what you're going to be looking at in regards to this is you're not going to look from a uniformity aspect on a horizontal plane or a vertical plane. What you're going to want to do is look at it from a volumetric, where everything is going to be located. So what we would come into for your systems to look at it from the design aspect of it and how you want to create that volumetric uniformity. Say it's 2 to 8 degrees C chamber and you have it at 5 degrees C plus or minus 2. We have to maintain in that structure that plus or minus 2 throughout it. So we're going to look at where the product's going to be stored, where your shelving racks are, obviously, things of this nature, and the proper placement for our sensors and where they're going to be. If you're non-redundant, typically we'll put it closest to the door because that's where you're going to see the first spike occur within a chamber, and your system needs to be responsible for that first spike that you're going to see. If it is a redundant system, it's going to generally go up closer to the ceiling, not in the space of, say, where your product would be stored, but into the area or the space that is a little bit above it, and we can capture your A system running, your B system running, making sure that we're well within that plus or minus 2 degrees C, and also capture your defrost spikes that are coming up. Your defrost spikes from an A system while B is running will generally go to the ceiling first. So we want to know kind of that thing. We will map out during your validation, you will know every location where your high and low could be within that 2 degrees C uniformity aspect. We can do chambers at plus or minus 1 degree C volumetric uniformity also if needed, but generally there's certain ranges. Stability might be plus or minus 1, cold rooms 2 to 8 might be plus or minus 2. Then when you move into your minus 20 freezers, they can get wider, maybe plus or minus 3, get down to a minus 40, plus or minus 5, things of that nature. And I hope I've answered that question.
I think so. So we actually have a couple more questions in the chat box. So we'll throw this one over to Rajiv. So Rajiv, what is the largest minus 80 degrees C freezer FARRAR has installed for a GMP facility?
I would say, Rebecca, it would be 311 cubic feet. That's the ULC technology that we have, and it's based on the forced air convection. We have something that's a little bit larger now that goes up to 328, and I don't believe we have actually installed one of those yet.
Great, thank you, Rajiv. So here's another one for Christian on walk-in solutions. So are there any flooring solutions that are meant for easy cleaning and non-slip?
Foreign solutions for easy cleaning and non-slip. Generally, when you want to do your cleaning of a chamber, first of all, you have to look at what you want to use. Lots of people use Spore Cleanse because they want to make sure that the chamber does not have anything growing in it, or possibly could, because you have drain pans, so there's moisture in there. Well, how you get that moisture in there is when we breathe a door opening, it goes to the coil. when we defrost everything off, it drops in the drain pane, goes out of the drain line. So they're going to clean coils, they're going to wipe down walls, they're going to do all of that. Now, when it comes to the floor aspect, whether they wipe that down or not, as far as a cleaning solution, that could be non-slip. That can be hard to say because it depends on what your floor is. And a lot of people will put down either vinyl flooring over top of it or even a floor matting going over it. Lots of times it'd be diamond tread, and that will provide kind of like a floor runner. So you have your shelving where no one walks, just sitting there, and then you have people going in and out. Some people, especially on ramps, you'll see them, they'll have basically placed on a kind of rough floor cleaner type material, so that way it provides a non-stick surface, so that way no one would slip when they're walking on that as well.
Great. So we're running up against time, so a shorter Q&A today, but we have one more question for Christian on walk-in solutions. So the question is, in your walk-in solutions, what type of refrigeration systems are being used?
Oh, in regards to the refrigeration systems, and some of it depends on your temperatures, you know, you have cascade systems, you can have compound systems, and then you typically will have semi-hermetic systems. And the semi-hermetics for 2 to 8 down to -20, -30 ranges pretty much is what typical. So we can do many type of applications depending on what you need. If you need a cold clean room, we're going to come in with stainless steel evaporators. We're going to have the HEPA filters, things of that nature to meet your ISO requirements for say 7 and 8 are the most common in the cold cleans. But then if you're doing a stability chamber, once again, you'll see stainless steel, possibly drop ceilings. If you're going to go into a cold room, a freezer down to -40, most likely an evaporator. All these are forced air approaches that we would be doing with this equipment. And so right now, typically you get into certain refrigerants. We're most likely using our 448A right now, but there's some really good alternatives coming down the pipeline that will get us down, you know, below 150 or close to it for a GWP. And also we can do alternatives for you, such as CO2 if that's required. So from a refrigeration aspect, the CO2 systems are really nice and handy because you have a GWP of 0 or 1, and that's very, very helpful for all people involved, especially with what's going on in the world today. So it's exciting. It is very, very exciting.
Great. So it looks like that's all the time we have for questions. If you still have a question or your question wasn't answered during the live Q&A, please go ahead and put it in the chat box and we'll make sure to follow up with any unanswered questions after today's event. If you would like more information on FARRAR's refrigeration solutions for life sciences, including ultra-low temperature, walk-in and drive-in engineered cold rooms, laboratory refrigerators and freezers, and more, we have several resources in the handout section of GoToWebinar, or you can visit us at www.farrarscientific.com. When today's webinar ends, you'll be directed to a survey. Your feedback is very important to us, so please take the time to complete the survey, let us know how we did, and also let us know what topics we should cover in a future webinar. That concludes today's event. Thank you so much to Rajiv Ahmed and Christian Podersky for leading this insightful discussion, and to our entire audience for joining us today. We hope to see you on the next one.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.